For us at Crash, this book is the result of a very fruitful collaboration between MSF, operations, and Vanja, and a researcher. And for MSF, more widely, it also marks a milestone in the reflection of the organization around that question of the relationship between patients and the medical institution. This book is somewhat of a landmark. It is an important event for us. And really, we're happy and proud to have this book publicized and launched here tonight. I won't say much of the project itself. Marc Chaka, the program manager for the Amman project, will be with us in a minute. And we'll just do that. What I would like to do just now is to introduce you briefly to Vanja. Vanja Kovačič has recently joined the MSF Mansfield unit at MSF UK. She has conducted research for 15 years now in the field of anthropology and medical anthropology in particular. She holds a PhD from the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. And her first work with MSF was in Kenya in 2010, I think. Our collaboration around this project that you will hear about tonight started in 2017. So you can see that the journey is long, which makes us even happier to see it over. I will just end by saying that it has been really an immense pleasure to work with you, Vanja, on this over the last 5 years. The rigor and independent mindset that she has have brought us to places we could not really imagine. So thank you. A few housekeeping issues and elements before we start, perhaps. We have until 8:30, meaning that we'll have 45 to 50 minutes of questions and debate with Vanja afterwards. Keep in mind that we have translation, meaning that I will ask you to speak slowly and distinctively. After Vanja's presentation, you will be able to ask questions either via Zoom by raising your hand or using the chat space. I will now give the floor directly to Marc. But before that, a big word of thanks to the translators and to the technicians who have been making this event possible. So thank you very much again, Vanja. Thank you, Marc. And I give you the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very happy to do a small introduction of the project before we dive into the core of the topic that's gathered us today. So the Amman Reconstructive Surgery Hospital has been opened in 2006, initially dedicated for Iraqi victims of violence. And it quickly followed the context of the Middle East and what we call the Arab Spring or the Arab Revolution. And it started to admit patients from different neighboring countries, mainly Palestine, Syria, and Yemen. So it is specialized in what we call reconstructive orthopedic, plastic, and maxillofacial surgery for victims of war and violence. And it's important to highlight the patients are all victims of violence, and the project is specialized in wound management. The reconstructive surgery is a treatment. It's not only a surgical procedure. It's a treatment that aims to restore the body after the injury, together with complex, comprehensive physical and mental rehabilitation. The treatment encompasses completely physiotherapy and mental health care, and it's an approach that we call a multidisciplinary approach that aims to restore well-being, dignity, autonomy for people who suffered from a severe injury or with a risk of severe handicaps. MSF defines the objective of this project as restoring the quality of life. So the quality of life is vast, is a broad concept that is sometimes difficult to define. And the hospital is a place where all the victims and the patients come from different countries. They find themselves together with common characteristic of being victim, being injured, sometimes with severe disfigure, severely disfigured, and all with different background. So after almost 10 years of running the programs, we have reached 4,000 patients admitted and almost 10,000 surgery performed. So it's interesting to have the figures, but we wanted to have a kind of different kind of review of the project, not an internal one saying how we do well, what we do wrong, or what we could improve in terms of quality, in terms of management, and so on. We have many good reasons to be proud of the hospital, but we are not interested to know, or we were not interested to know how good we are. What was needed is to assess the outcome of the treatment that we provide, not from a surgical, medical, or functional perspective, but really from the patient's personal and emotional perspective. How the treatment is perceived, is it worth the effort for the patients first, because we ask them to leave their home, to leave their country, to leave their family, to come to a foreign country, receive a complex, long, sometimes painful treatment. It's not an easy experience for them, and is the model and the treatment we provide answering their expectations? Does it improve their life from their own perspective? And does it help them to regain dignity and autonomy? So we are very happy today to share and very happy to listen to Vanja, who with distance, independence, and high level of professionalism ended with a very outstanding result of the study. And we are very happy to present this qualitative study that she conducted, and that helped us, what Michaël said at the beginning, to adapt accordingly the model to meet the patient's expectations, and to develop what we call and what we want to develop in MSF today, the patient-centered approach. How we can develop a model that is centered towards the patient's expectations and the patient's interest and so on. So yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me also make this small introduction. I'm very happy, and again, we are very enthusiastic to share that. It has been a very wonderful experience for everyone, and I leave you the floor then. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your warm welcome, Michaël, and for your introductory words, Mark, as well. And good evening, everyone. Welcome here in the room and those who joined us online. For me, this feels like a quite unique moment, because the book has been written a while ago, and it's really an opportunity to revisit some of my memories, some of my reflections. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to do that tonight. And I'm aware that we might have those in the audience who are external to MSF or not so familiar with this program. So I would just like to add a couple of words to give a book a context. So like Mark said, the people who are treated in the hospital in Amman are not freshly wounded. They might be injured a while ago, a couple of years ago. And when they arrive to the hospital, they suffer from post-surgical complications or persistent infections. So they might present as on the wheelchair without capacity to walk or stand up. Some of them have their faces destroyed to the point that they're not able to chew food or speak clearly. And some have extensive burns over their body. So they undergo like surgical care, physiotherapy, psychosocial support, and their treatment might last for quite a long time. So they might stay in the hospital for over a year. And during this time, MSF covers all the expenses for the patients to travel to Jordan, and also during their stay for their accommodation and their basic needs. Their medical histories are sometimes so complicated that there are no existing surgical procedures, no existing protocols. So surgeons working in the hospital very often take on innovative approaches, and the surgeries conducted in this hospital are foreseen as something extraordinary, something extremely demanding, not only for the hospital, but in the global scale of the surgery. So when I joined the program, Mark mentioned a genuine interest to collect patients' feedback, and quality of life was something that was discussed as a measuring framework. So when I started looking into the concept itself, it appeared quite common for the providers of healthcare in the area of disability. But at the same time, there were many existing tools and definitions that were defining the quality of life. And in the context where we worked, it just appeared quite bizarre because patients that we dealt with were victims of war. They live with a permanent disability, most of them, and many of them still live in the context of violence. So talking about quality of life was a bit abstract, and it gave me an interesting dilemma to resolve. And the way I managed it was that I actually asked patients themselves to define what the quality of life means to them, and then I used their own definitions to reflect back on the program. So this is just a bit of the context. So now we can dive into the book. The book is based on extensive fieldwork, which I conducted in 2017 and 2018 in Jordan and Iraq. And it reports on over 170 interviews with staff, health workers working in the reconstructive surgery hospital, and with the patients. Also, the text in the book is enriched with many observations. So it takes the reader behind the doors that usually remain closed. So inside of the MSF hospital and also inside of the patients' homes where I was conducting the interviews. So the main focus of the book are victims of war. And the book describes their journey from the moment when their injury happened through the improvised medical care to the moment when they ended up in the MSF hospital and ends in the moment when they return back home. So through this journey, they were picking up the pieces of their previous life. They were adding new elements, and like that, they reconstructed a new reality with which they live today. So that's the reason for the book to be titled Reconstructing Lives. And what motivated me to write this book was that the testimonies which I collected were profoundly intimate and very touching, but also they carried so many important messages that help us to look at the patients and their rehabilitation process differently, more holistically. But what I also found fascinating was that the stories of the patients, victims of war and humanitarian workers were carrying something ultimately human, something that was touching the human reactions in the most extreme circumstances. And I thought that this could be of an interest to anyone who is intrigued with exploring the human nature. So now I invite you to explore with me some of their testimonies. It was 6th April 2012. About 20,000 soldiers invaded the neighborhood near Ismael's home. Mortars started shelling. So Ismael was hiding in the house with a couple of other men, and they were waiting for the moment where they could leave and start rescuing people who were under the collapsed buildings. The house was hit and Ismael's leg was injured. in panic, another person unintentionally trampled over his leg and his femur was broken. So his friends evacuated him by placing him on a door that was used as a stretcher. The street was under a sniper fire. In the surrounding areas, the holes were open inside of the buildings, so that allowed some safe passage. So they managed to get into the car, and the tank shell barely missed them. They arrived to the first aid post, which was sheltered in the school. So the desks were replaced by beds. There was a lack of even basic medical supplies, and pieces of cloth were used instead of compresses. So soon after, Ismael was attended in another improvised hospital where he was cared for by a car mechanic who, in the dire consequences of war, learned how to provide some life-saving procedures. So Ismael's wound was sutured, but it was still filled with dirt, and everyone was quite aware that this is likely to lead to the dangerous infection later on. But under those circumstances, nobody was able to prevent that. So the next day, Ismael's relatives brought him to the government hospital in the city of Homs, which was quite far from his neighborhood. The road was extremely dangerous. They zigzagged to avoid being hit, and dead bodies were lying all over the streets. So Ismael said that it was said about the journey that the one who comes out of it alive has his mother praying for him. Ismael was hidden at the back of the Skoda mini truck under the trampoline. So being injured and male made him experience severe risk because the government army assumed that anyone in this situation was collaborating with anti-government forces. So they could be arrested at any moment in their homes, on the roads, or inside of the hospital. So Ismael fainted before they reached the hospital. But as he woke up, he overheard the nurse saying that the security forces were already tracing them. So due to the fear of arrest, they had only 1 hour inside of the hospital. Ismael was taken to the operations theater, and the metal piece, external fixator, was placed into his leg to fix the broken femur. This was done only under the regional local anesthesia. Then, after that, Ismael was hiding all the time, and he almost lost his life on a couple of occasions. His health started to deteriorate, and that made him decide to leave Syria. The trip to reach Jordanian border took a month and a half, and on the way, 2 members of his group were killed by the soldiers. But that was not the end of the tragedies. So when he finally reached the border, the Jordanian border guards were welcoming, but they didn't let him enter to the country without his relatives. There were a couple of other Syrian families who were not able to enter either because they didn't have necessary documents. So they all turned back, and as they were working back to Syria, the Syrian border guards opened fire, and all the families were killed on the spot. So Ismael joined others, burying them, and he remembered that night as one of the worst nights of his life. But eventually he managed to enter Syria and to enter Jordan, and he started his life inside of the Zaatari refugee camp, where he had no access to treatment because of the long waiting times. So he got a job as a baker, which took him to stand for 12 hours a day. His infection resumed, he was in severe pain, and one day he collapsed. So his friends told him about the hospital, which is ran by foreign doctors. And that was a moment where he said that he experienced the suspension of his misery, and his ultimate treatment began. So Ismael was only one of the many injured civilians that I met during this time in the hospital, and his story in many ways was unique, but also comparable to many others that I was listening to. So the injury was a moment for all of them that changed their life forever. They were experiencing persistent infections. They needed to pay large sums of money to bribe the hospital staff and be able to enter the hospitals. They were hunted down, they were tortured, they witnessed mass killing, and they survived. And what they also lost was a trust in humanity. So after these such difficult events, when they finally entered to the MSF hospital, they reported feeling emotionally tired. That was the term they often used. So much so that undergoing medical procedures was just perceived as additional stress and difficult to deal with. So before entering to the operations theater, they often expressed anxiety, and the hospital staff usually interpreted that as a usual anxiety before the surgery. But what was actually happening in those moments was that they were having flashbacks. They were remembering all the difficulties they had before. One patient, for instance, thanked me for gently knocking at the door when I was entering the patient's room. And he said that abrupt knocking still causes a huge sense of panic because he remembers the times when he could be arrested at any moment. So when I was patient somehow silently faced these emotional reactions, and when I was communicating these examples back to the hospital staff, they were surprised about that. And when I asked patients, how did they feel in the hospital, the question often lightened their face and the smile was playing on their lips. They were enthusiastically talking about finally feeling safe. They were commenting on the warm attitudes of staff, on the proper pain management, well-organized appointments. And generally they talked about the hospital as the place where their physical and emotional wounds could finally start to heal. And spending time in the hospital, what was also very obvious was a sense of informality. So patients didn't wear the usual hospital clothes, but they were wearing clothes they brought from home or they received as donations in the hospital. And sometimes they were moving around so confidently that at the beginning, I was not sure whether they're patients or the hospital staff. They also didn't mind just stopping surgeons at the hospital corridors. They were referring to them with the doctor and the first name and engaging into the informal chats. A lot of interactions were also happening inside of the hospital cafeteria where patients were mixing with hospital staff. So that was a place where a lot of interactions were happening on quite informal way. So this kind of informality and also a long stay of the patients in the hospital provided a space that was very rich with human interactions and also perceptions, emotions, and occasionally conflicts and dilemmas. So the details about those are further explored in the book. But here I would only like to mention one interesting dilemma that arose around the topic of patients' expectations. So when I had a conversation about that with the hospital staff, particularly surgeons and physiotherapists appeared stressed when they talked about patients' high expectations. So they said that patients' expectations are beyond what was their capacity, so beyond what they could solve. But when I talked with the patients, it didn't appear in any way extreme what they were listing as their expectations. So they depending on their own personal situation, they were mentioning expected improvements. For instance, to be able to walk again, to wipe out the physical pain, to heal the infection, to finally be able to have access to surgery, to be treated respectfully, to improve my health and return to my children. But what they often added in these conversations were their hopes, simply hopes for a better future. And they were commenting that their hopes were lost, and coming to the MSF hospital, the hopes were slowly coming back, and that was extremely important for their emotional well-being. So this interesting dilemma was worth exploring further. And when I debated it further, particularly with surgeons who were extremely engaged with patients. So there were some, they knew all the background story of the patients. It was obvious that they felt immense sense of responsibility towards them. And this was often beyond the medical care. So for example, they talked about attempts to give patients new lives, to reconstruct their old lives, or to bring them back to their normal lives. So a fascinating aspect of our conversations was that these members of staff had quite high expectations on themselves, but often they were projecting them on the patients. So they were placed in a state between a desire to restore what has been lost in war and also feelings of guilt and inadequacy when this was not realistic. And what was ultimately expressed in both sides was immense sense of grief, arriving from realization that the war robbed patients from their dignity and future. So what was needed in this situation was simply a space for this grief and vulnerability to be expressed on both sides. And the space and support at the time when I was in the hospital was to the great extent missing, especially for the staff. So staff often communicated that being confronted with this kind of level of human suffering is having a negative impact on their emotional well-being and life in general. So it came as a surprise for the staff when they received patients' feedback, and to the big extent, the patients, many of them, communicating the treatment meeting or even exceeding their expectations. So this was particularly the case with the patients who obtained new capacity to walk, or those who were under risk of amputations, but this was not the outcome. And Syrian patients who in Jordan had very little access to the surgery. So I met them a couple of years after they were discharged from the hospital in their homes, and they were enthusiastically describing how they obtained new independence. And this was particularly important for independently doing the daily hygiene practices. So they commented how this really brought a sense of dignity back to them. Some obtained new opportunity to do work, but this was not just any kind of work, but the profession that they practiced before the war in their home countries. So for instance, a blacksmith from Syria was able to practice work as a blacksmith inside of Jordan, and that gave him a new sense of normality. And some patients also obtained opportunity to get married. So this they mentioned was not possible without the treatment. And they were telling me about receiving the first child. So they were thanking both God and MSF for having this opportunity. But not all the patients were satisfied with the outcome of the treatment. So this is probably the best illustrated by an observation that I had with one of the Iraqi patients who I met during her last physiotherapy session. So her image is very much still vivid in my mind because she had this long blonde hair. She was always wearing elegant dresses, and she paid a special attention how she was perceived. So according to the physiotherapist, she was a complete medical miracle. She arrived to the hospital with one leg 15 centimeters shorter than the other leg and with severe limping. So during surgery and physiotherapy, this was fixed. And when I saw her during physiotherapy, she was quite confidently walking, almost without limping. She had a good balance, sitting down, getting up. So when I asked her if she was satisfied with treatment and if she achieved what she was hoping for, she looked straight into my eyes and she said no. So I asked for an explanation. And she lifted her skirt and showed me her other non-injured leg, which was slightly swollen and twisted in the ankle. So she said, look, I was coping quite well with my limping, but what I was hoping for was to fix the appearance of this other leg with the surgery. So what she clearly communicated was that her priority was not the program priority, and the program was missing an important component. So some other patients had similar feedback, particularly those with obvious visual impairments, so with obvious scars or burns over their bodies. So some men strongly believe that scars made them seem somehow deviant in the eyes of others. So when they look at me, it's like they notice there is something on my face. They think that that person is a troublemaker or a criminal. So if we put that into the context of somebody who is war injured and who is under a consistent social glance, whether he's a perpetrator or a victim, this really adds a very heavy weight to these kind of notions. Women often suffered by the fact that with their deformations, they could not get married or divorce was just inevitable. So some of them were abandoned along with their children, and they just took it as a fact. You also met a young Iraqi man, about 25 years old, and his mother said that he made a special exception of meeting us because otherwise he doesn't receive any visitors. So he reported that since he returned home a couple of years ago, he has not left the house. So he lived in a complete social isolation. He expressed suffering from social anxiety and also communicated suicidal thoughts. So those patients reported that program focusing mostly on functional improvements of their limbs and mobility was not doing justice to them. So the social functionality, immensely important to the patients, remained greatly neglected. But patients' experience with healthcare and the outcome of it is only one part of the story. And many of us who work in the humanitarian setting, in the medical care, are very much focused about this. But patients, of course, also add their own part to their life journey. And I would just like to share a couple of examples because really they were fascinating in the way how much creativity and motivation was used from their side just to gain a new perspective in life and to live with their past in a better way. So most commonly mentioned coping mechanism was the exposure of two other patients with similar injuries and similar history. So this was surprising because even those participants who had quite severe injuries still maintained this approach. For instance, there was a young Iraqi patient who commented that observing other injured people in the hospital, he realized that he was not exceptional among other people. And despite losing his eye and one of his hands, he felt lucky compared to those who were suffering from burns. There was also a great level of calm and acceptance expressed by those who took a fatalistic approach. So they took their situation as God's given. It's our fate and we should continue with our life. What was also fascinating for me was that the process of healing often involved the perspective on the perpetrators. So most of my participants were injured either by an army or random explosion. So they had not reference to the perpetrator, but a few of them saw an individual who shot at them. So one example was an Iraqi participant who received a gunshot from an American soldier, and later he met him in the hospital. So he thought that this soldier ended up in the hospital because during American invasion of Iraq, the American military was frequently invading hospitals and screening people and arresting them under the claim that they're terrorists. So this was a potential reason why the soldier was in the same hospital where this man was treated. But he expressed no hatred, no anger, no blame towards this individual. So what he said was, I saw the one who shot me while I was in the hospital. He was a kid. He was trembling and shaking when he saw me. Maybe he was about 19 years old. The damage was already done. I was thinking about myself and how to get better at that moment. Even if he would come to me now, there is nothing I would do to him. I would not tell him anything harsh. It's up to God to make him pay back. So my participants really experienced multiple losses, but they didn't carry any personal blame for the perpetrator. So the blame was mostly collective. Some participants completely shifted attention from their injuries to other aspects of life. So an example was a female participant who throughout the interview attempted to change the topic of discussion to her recent weight gain. So she wondered why it happened. She commented that she didn't change her lifestyle or diet, and she was asking for advice how to lose the weight. She reported that her husband's negative comments are her major problem in life. But from the outside, this appeared quite extreme because along with her family, she was living a nomadic life. The family lived in the tent with 4 children, and the younger ones, the youngest only 11 years old, were working to provide for the entire family. So what she was shifting her attention from the aspects of life that were difficult to change to the aspects of life that she was able to manage. And some participants took a completely different outlook on disability. One of them said, disability is in the mind, not in the body and looks. So he had this air of self-confidence and expressed being proud of his amputation. And this was really in the drastic contrast with a lot of other amputees who were embarrassed by it. So what was different with him was that he was injured while he was rescuing other people. So he took his injury not as a symbol of disability, but as a sign of heroism. And today he's living very optimistically. And when I asked him about his disability, he reported no disability, but the financial one. So far, we looked a bit at the history of my participants, the treatment and their reflection on the treatment they received in Amman, and also their own ways how they frame their past and that helps them to live today. And lastly, what I would like to explore is a reflection on the rehabilitation process in the past, and if that included any social reintegration. So the warfare, it's not new to the humankind. There were massive wars before that left thousands and thousands of young men at the peak of their productive power disabled. So after the First World War, there were first rehabilitation centers that opened across Europe and US to try to rehabilitate these veterans, war veterans. And at the time, the body was perceived as a machine with parts of the body amendable and adjustable. So that was a time when first prosthetic items were developed. And rehabilitation centers provided training, individual training for each disabled man to teach him how to perform certain tasks and to optimize them. So these veterans, disabled veterans, were getting back into the society through gainful employment. So the boundary between able and disabled body at the time was somehow blurred, and social reintegration was considered like a standard. At that time, also doctors and surgeons led public discourse on disability, and they often joined veterans, particularly amputees, who were perceived as a face of war, in their struggle for social rights. And after the Second World War, the plastic surgery broke new grounds. And a British pioneering plastic surgeon, Sir Mackindo, developed some novel techniques, particularly to reconstruct the faces after burns. So during this period, also medical personnel was aware not only to work of the need not only to work on patients' bodies, but also to help them through their painful reintegration back to the society. So Mackindo formed what was jokingly called the guinea pig clubs. This was a name given by his patients who were joking that he's experimenting on them. And the pictures from these clubs show men with obvious deformations, but wearing suits, smoking cigars, toasting over dinners, from what it looks like a higher social setting. So the clubs were formed to give back the dignity to these patients, but also to influence the society, to integrate them back. So the concept of rehabilitation of the war injured through social participation is not novel, and it was in place after the First and the Second World War. And in both periods, the medical doctors and the surgeons were on the front line as advocates. So medical treatment, occupational therapy, and social reintegration were seen as medical duties. And my participants had injuries that could be seen and those that could be sensed. So their journey to healing required healing on all the aspects of human existence, on physical, emotional, spiritual, and social. So by reconstructive surgery program focusing primarily on the functional aspects of rehabilitation, the component of social rehabilitation was lost. But MSF began to acknowledge this and now really promotes a different approach to treatment. So after this research was concluded, there was a number of initiatives in the hospital to try to fill these gaps, and patients were also involved in leading some of these initiatives. So those are also described more at the end of the book. So finally, how the Middle East is going to reintegrate thousands and thousands of injured people after their wars is an open question. And it's also a fitting point for me to close this reflection. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Vanja. Thank you very, very much for starting this conversation. get ready for your comments or questions. As I said earlier, there is a translation, so feel free to ask your questions or to write your questions in French, and they will be translated to Vanja in English. To give you time to get ready, I will ask the first one. And perhaps just to go a bit deeper in what you said at the very end. There was obviously some feedback that you provided the team about what you've done for like almost 18 months, I think, in total, between 17 and 18, to the staff in the hospital, and also to the program manager based in Amman. Can you tell us a bit how the research, which was actually, before it became a book, it was a report, and then the report was turned into this book, which actually is quite different from the report. What was how was the research received, welcome, acknowledged? You mentioned a bit about, some of the process that came afterwards, but can you get into details about, those conversations that you had in Amman when you first started to provide that feedback?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, there was definitely like a genuine curiosity what the patients reported. And people were quite eagerly waiting for the end of the research. And when I communicated back, there was a number of surprises. Like one of them being that to the large parts, patients were satisfied with treatment. But of course, I was also raising a number of very uncomfortable topics. So on some of them, it took a bit of time to actually open a debate and to move into a more constructive phase. But there was a genuine interest to see some changes. And when I returned back to Amman some time after the report was written, I really found a number of very enthusiastic members of staff who wanted to contribute their ideas, brainstorming, and also bring in the patients. So we started from there. We also focused very much around the topics of the patient's rights. So we worked together with the patients to reflect on that. And this somehow slowly started opening a space for patients to be more involved in the dialogue. There was also a number of other initiatives. So some were related to becoming a bit more focused on pediatric patients. So this is an aspect I didn't mention before, but the program started first receiving adult patients, but over time there were more and more pediatric patients, and they were not supported emotionally through the medical treatment. So there was an idea to create a video which would be led by other children in the hospital, so they could guide the camera around the hospital and show children who are yet to come to the hospital how the setting looks like. In terms of improvements, physical improvements through the surgery, also we had a number of conversations, and what became clear is that, of course, there are also surgical limitations to that. So there was an example of the use of laser treatment on the scars, but there is no medical evidence that this always works in all the situations. So, but what was actually missing was the space for patients to express this desire, these needs, and for medical staff to respond to them with communicating what are the risks and what are the possibilities. So there was a number of interesting debates, some very practical things implemented after.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions already. I will ask F. Bruce online to ask a question, and then a question here in the room from Nathalie. Eve, please go ahead. Allez-y, je vous en prie.
Hi, Vanja, can you hear me?
Yes, Eve, I hear you.
I was wondering through, of course I was there with you, but I was wondering if either you or the mental health team or anybody found, how some patients would return to socialization, would rehabilitate socially easily, seemingly, not easily, but more easier than others, and others, like the person who you went to in Iraq, who never went out from their house. Did the patient say something that helped some and not others, or is there a way that we can help people that are having trouble socially rehabilitating to move back into the social life easier? Did the mental health team come up with anything, or did you notice anything?
Nice to see you, Eve, and thank you for the question.
Nice to see you too.
So what I could see as a difference was those patients who had quiet, supportive family environment were the ones that actually managed quite well with their social integration as well. So there was a number of husbands that were, despite their wives reporting, feeling very much uncomfortable with their injuries, commenting how much they accept the situation and how much in love they still feel with their wives. There were also families where the injured person was at the center of their attention, and they were trying to accommodate them with their needs, encourage them to go out, to find a job. So from my limited experience, this played a huge role in their social reintegration. So those who suffered the most were the ones that were injured. Some of them were injured as a teenager, and today they live as young adults. So they had serious issues with acceptance, I would say. But there were also some where the family environment was quite complex. So what comes to my mind is one of the young patients who, when we started the interview, he was mostly quiet, but it was her parents who were commenting. So first it was father saying how much they were trying to hide him inside of Syria so he would not be recruited into the army. And so the father was going out working, and as a result, he got arrested. And then the mother was adding how much she worried when her son got injured and he could be killed anytime. And eventually the parents left the room, and this young man was communicating how much burdened he felt by all the sacrifices that the families have done for him. So that played a huge role. I would say.
So it would seem that opens the possibility of educating and managing and enhancing the patient's family environment to optimize social rehabilitation. I'm not saying it's easy, but that opens the possibility.
Yes.
From your observations. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. For next question in line, if you can set yourself with the headset, that would be easier for the translators. Now, two questions here, Nathalie and then Jacob, and then back to Vanja.
Okay. Thanks, Vanja. Is that working? Yep. Thanks, Vanja, very much for the presentation. I thought it was very interesting at the end, the parallel you made with the guinea pig clubs and Makindo, because what I'm trying to understand is that was a particular period in time with a certain cohort of young men who'd all fought together in the same military, who not only developed a relationship with their doctor, with Makindo, but also a sort of social network amongst themselves that they can then continue for the long term. So the guinea pig clubs, 20, 30, 40 years later, we're still using each other as a social support network that help with their social reintegration. For the future, for patients that have come out from Amman, given that they come from different countries, they're civilians, they're from different social networks, there's men, there's women, there's children, do you think that sort of potential for social networking and helping to support each other through the different experiences is possible, or is it just too diverse a population to be a useful network for them? I know they create relationships when they're in the hospital, but once they leave the hospital, will those relationships be useful for their future sort of rehabilitation to society?
Yes, that actually was one of the initiatives attempted when I went back to Amman. So the idea was that there would be patients who return back to their country, and they would act a bit as an expert patients. And their role would be that they would somehow prepare other patients better before they travel to Amman, and also receive back patients returning home after that long period of time where they needed to adjust back to their life. So this idea existed. So after, unfortunately, like as soon as I left Amman, there was a COVID, so I'm not sure to which extent it was already implemented.
Thanks. I have a question that's as well about time, because I was thinking that Amman is quite a unique project for a humanitarian organization in a way, because both the time already elapsed after the injury of the patient and the time that the patient spends in the hospital means that there's a certain kind of relationship that can be built with the staff between the patients, etc., etc. And normally for humanitarian projects, we're seeing patients maybe not normally, but in many cases, we're seeing patients at much more of the acute stage. They're spending a lot less time in the hospital. And I know that you're still working for MSF, so I wondered how you'd used some of the lessons that you'd learned from Amman about, for example, the quality of care, the quality of life, asking the patient how they defined the quality of life, how that had gone on to inform your thinking about other projects where that temporality is just not the same, and what possibilities there are to improve our relationship building with patients in those situations where the time scale is just not the same.
Yes, I think that some lessons learned could be applicable to other programs in MSF, and that would go beyond the length of stay for the patients. So for instance, like opening the space for patients to communicate their feedback. This is something that I think MSF is more and more focusing on, or the focus on patients' rights and informing patients about their rights, and then also working together with staff in implementation of these rights. For instance, what was very much appreciated in Amman was that the staff eventually wanted to implement some changes in the daily communication with patients, but they were just not sure what's expected from them or what they could change. So through observation and feedback, they were able to open space for more dialogue. So yes, I think there are a number of like cross-cutting areas that could be implemented elsewhere.
Yeah, Vanja, there is in some of what you say. I mean, you mentioned the word disabled later in your discussion, and this is a word that MSF is not actually quite accustomed to or not used to using. And I would say, let alone in that project, which, as Mark recalled earlier, is called the Reconstructive Surgery Project. How much do you think this work of yours and the reflection that came afterwards led MSF to somewhat reshaped that RSP project, the reconstructive surgery project, to something that actually we assumed being a project for disabled person, which is something that we needed to get a grasp on, something new, not an innovation in itself, because there are plenty of projects everywhere in the world, but certainly for a medical humanitarian organization like ours.
So yes, like I mentioned, the label of disability was not comfortable to many of my participants, and they've perceived themselves as very much abled. And this perhaps would stretch a bit towards a notion of the patients being perceived as victims, which in many ways was running the empathy of the staff regarding the patients, but sometimes was also using an image of the patient as somebody who is just passive receiver of medical treatment. I think the program was slowly moving out of that scope, and through the occupational therapy, through psychosocial support that was also taking new approaches when I was in the hospital last. And so they tried to recognize that individual approach is needed in that, and that patients themselves are the ones that should define to which extent they feel able to do certain things, and then the program should support them in this direction.
So we have Marc Chacal back with us, who wanted to react to what Vanja was saying earlier, and then we're back here with a question from Lucy. Marc?
Yeah, thank you. But thank you for the presentation. It was very interesting. It summarizes very well the questions that we also raised, in our work in the hospital. So you mentioned it's a reconstructive surgery project. In 2016-17, it was called like that. Today, and I want to quote my colleagues in Amman, I don't know if they are here, but we are talking much more about a patient-centered multidisciplinary care program, much more than a reconstructive surgery project. And I was trying to explain that in the introduction, that the surgery is a treatment, and it's a comprehensive treatment. It's part of a comprehensive treatment, and there was a shift in our approach and even understanding of the care we provide. Since the study has been done, we start to be much more. Well, we don't start. It's something that we have been talking a lot since then, is the continuity of care once the patient is back home. How do we do proper follow-up from his physical needs in terms of prosthetic, for example, but also from his mental health and mental support that he needs when he's back home. How we involve the patients much more in their health care. It's nothing about the patients without the patient himself. Make sure he understands properly what we offer. He understands the words that the surgeons are using. We developed a full and patient-centered program, project approach in the hospital with patients committee to strengthen a bit the communication between the patients and the caregivers. We developed a complaint mechanism also to formalize also the way the patient's feedback and the way we also can answer a bit more their expectations. You mentioned the patient charters and things like that. The pediatric approach is one of them. So there are a lot of things that triggered, that this study triggered, and that have been implemented over time, with some successes or some less. But it's true that with the difficulties, with all the constraints we had in the past 2 years, few things have been slowed down. But in general, the dynamic and the approach and the relation with the patients has been a bit shifted since we have this study and these outcomes. So I think it's important also to try to share a bit what were the results and how we translated these studies, this analysis into concrete actions within the program itself, beyond the surgery that is performed only in the hospital.
So thank you, Mark, for this update. Like obviously the study was a snapshot of time in the past, and it's really reassuring to see how far the program moved after that.
Hi, thank you, Vanja, for the presentation. I think that what's really interesting is that the work that you did and that you just presented is really about taking the time to dig into the life story of our patient or of the patients, and that it helps humanizing who they are from our point of view for MSF and for the staff, and help also, thanks to that, to individualize, as you say, the care we provide. And so, which I think for a humanitarian organization is sometimes a bit difficult when we are working with large number of patients in a very short time. So my question is, not every project has the luck to have you visit or to have you there for such a period, a long period of time. So how do you think that could be done on other projects to be able to, maybe not to such extent, but to dig into this the life story of our patient, to be able to know them more, which will help the team to do that work of patient-centeredness.
Thank you. Well, from my observation, I would say that patient stories are frequently known by staff. Like staff exposed from the day-to-day to patients would know their background. But what is actually missing is for them to be included into the dialogue. So for them to be able to influence the care that is provided to them. And this is something that it's more related to the day-to-day practice than having like an extensive research work done. But there is still a need occasionally, I would say, to systematically collect feedback from patients, because especially with the long-term programs, this could somehow shape the future of the program.
Vanja, I take the mic for a couple of questions online, and then I'll send back to the room. So this is a question from Claire, and she's asking, so I'm just like reading the question. Considering there were several nationalities and people coming and returning to different contexts, did you see differences in how the patients create links with each other, or had different expectations from the hospital according to the various nationalities? And she has another one. Was there an Amman solidarity transnational dynamic? So this is like the question about whether patients from different origin were seeing the project differently. And I will, because I've did more than read your book, actually ask the reverse question. Can you tell us a bit about the staff dynamic towards patients of different nationalities, perhaps? This goes both ways in a way.
Okay, so one important thing to mention is that I was interviewing only Syrian and Iraqi patients. So the Yemeni patients, who also present like a quite large group of patients in the hospital, was excluded from this study simply because the security situation didn't allow me to go to Yemen at the time, and we thought that doing interviews over the phone would be compromising the quality of the interview. So in terms of solidarity among patients, like the groups that I interviewed were certainly expressing this, like they were in the hospital, like often commenting how they are doing little tasks for each other. So some patients who had difficulty with mobility would be assisted by another patient. Some became very good friends. So during one of the interview, participant came with her friend and they were commenting how they could understand each other, how they encouraged each other to continue with education. So the sense of solidarity certainly was there in the hospital. So for the second Claire's question, I'm not sure whether it's similar to yours, or do you want to rephrase it?
She's asking whether an Amman solidarity transnational with it between patients, regardless of the nationality.
And so the second question you had was around the perceptions and interactions of the hospital staff with patients from different groups. So there were quite some differences, the way the staff was talking about patients from different countries. And they were very much like complimentary towards Iraqi patients, a bit neutral towards Syrian patients, and a bit negative towards Yemeni patients. So some participants were explaining that these differences in perceptions are purely driven from the fact that they had more contact previously with the culture from Iraq and Syria, and less so from Yemen. And the debate we had around that was that we, as humans, we all have tendency to stereotype, but inside of the medical setting, this could influence the medical decisions. So the examples I was giving was from the US, where there is a research reporting how African American patients with the same conditions, heart condition, would be recommended less of the surgeries compared to white Americans. And the doctors were completely unaware that their perceptions, negative perceptions, were influencing their medical judgments. So when we opened this discussion in the hospital, like some reactions at the beginning were a bit angry. So there were questions, why am I reporting on that? Some very much acknowledged that they are using stereotypes generally in their life, but there was a general tendency that this was not something that should be happening inside of the hospital, and that everyone should be just aware of any perceptions we have.
So just a question here, Jean-Hervé, you can go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask the question about the situation of Yemeni patients, but it has been addressed. So beside that, what did you find as the most difficult in your investigation, you know?
Well, there was a number of difficulties, I would say. So one was that some participants were describing the acts of violence in a quite like graphic way. Some were even showing the videos of people who were killed in front of them. So for all of us, myself and my research team, these were like accounts that were causing, of course, emotional reactions that needed to be processed later. Then the second difficulty was related mostly to the challenges of the fieldwork in Iraq. When we were doing interviews, it was the time right after elections and the time during Ramadan. So this situation caused a lot of security constraints for us to move around, but also for the participants they were not too keen to travel long distances. So occasionally it took time for us to find time and space to meet. And because also some of the participants were not comfortable of us arriving to their house. They were, some were quite suspicious also of us, asking if we are journalists. So before these interviews, we needed quite a lot of reassurance to explain what we were doing and who we were. And then occasionally there were moments where I was questioning the psychological states that my participants were in. So those that were acting a bit unbalanced, I was not sure if they could react aggressively towards my questions. But usually throughout the interview, especially in Iraq, because they were expressing a lot of anger in general. But throughout the interviews, the tone changed and there was a different atmosphere. So those were some of the difficulties. Then, of course, another difficulty was to start reporting on these difficult topics, and all those required changes. So I somehow was aware that the changes will be met sometimes with a bit of resistance. And this, yes, at times was also not so easy to face. So those were the biggest difficulties.
Thanks. Well, we've obviously focused the conversation around Amman, which makes sense. But we've, at MSF and within the humanitarian sector, have been using this notion of patient-centeredness quite a lot over the last few years. So I was, and you've been like, moving around this world for some years now, field investigation for humanitarian organization for 15 years with MSF, for more than 10, now occupying a position of advisor, anthropological advisor for operations. How would you say, despite how exceptional it is, I mean, that project, RSP project, is very unique in the region, in the world, for MSF, but how does it compare to your observations? How do you think they compare to what you're seeing elsewhere, and how much do you think your recommendation might be applicable or interesting for other context and project of MSF or other organizations?
Well, perhaps I could focus a bit more on this notion of patient-centered approach. So that's something that now in most of the projects, it's becoming discussed, it's becoming a focus. And what I observe a lot is that still this notion is used very much as a concept. So what we managed, or what Mark already shared, was that the notion was translated into action, into concrete changes. So one reassuring thing, I think, for other programs is that it's actually possible with the right information, leadership, and motivation to do that. So, like I said, that the combination of people who are open to change, enough expertise in the team, undeniable feedback from the patients, very good ideas from the staff in the hospital on how things could be improved. All that was helping to move changes. So I think these examples could be used in other programs.
Yeah, a couple of questions from the chat. Feel free to ask them. We can give ourselves a bit more than 15 minutes perhaps before we close the session, so do not hesitate. I will ask two questions in order. You can take them in the order you like. The first one from Sharif Alam, actually was project coordinator of the hospital between 2013 and 2015, so he knows the place. and I was just like reading it loud. While you were doing the interview with the patients, have you recognized that the patients had some recommendations, and what were the main points raised by them, and have they been discussed with the team for improvement? So that's Sherif's question. And then a question from Doris Butcher, that you know, a colleague of yours. Thank you, Vanja, for this very interesting presentation of your research. I would be interested to hear how was the caring attitude of the hospital staff, and how was this perceived by the patients?
Okay, on Sherif's one, what was concretely like recommendations were some of the aspects that I already discussed, but what they often commented on was just please give us space to hope. So don't say that our treatment or our life or our future is finished. So that was sometimes related to the notion of the maximum benefit achieved. So that's the notion under which the patients were when their treatment was finished in the hospital without a follow-up after. So some patients really felt that this was not an appropriate term to use. Medically speaking, it was term when through the medical procedures they could achieve what was possible in that period of time. But from the patient side, they were saying, okay, we still need to hope that things could improve. So maximum benefit achieved could be changed to something else. And the second question by Doris was the caring attitudes by the staff. Well, patients were often mentioning also members of staff, the names of the members of staff who were particularly nice to them. And this was years after they were discharged. So in general, they felt the interactions were warm. They were supported. The staff cared about their needs, and sometimes even went out of their professional roles to accommodate them. So those were mostly the reactions. So some opposing views would be by those who were quite confident, who were asking a lot of questions, and those were frequently labeled as naggy or difficult patients.
Thank you. Actually, in line with this last answer of yours, I don't think you mentioned that some of the staff actually are, I mean, they come from these places at war. So I was wondering if you could say a bit about, you know, how does it work for these people who've also been facing war violence to be confronted to those patients, you know, in terms of mental distress, stress in general. How does that working in this environment impact on bodies and psychology of the staff? Mm-hmm. And how much do we care for them also? It's, mm-hmm.
Yes, true. Like some members of staff were coming from the countries, the same countries than the patient, Iraq, Yemen, Syria. And those members of staff, of course, were confronted with additional challenges. Like first was that receiving their countrymen was a reminder of everything that was happening in their home countries. They also often had like histories of themselves being exposed to violence. And they also had families back home that they worried about. So in addition to this quite like emotionally demanding work they were doing on the day-to-day basis, they were also dealing with their personal situation. So at the time, my impression was that they were not sufficiently supported. This is what they communicated. And there was a need really to also acknowledge that they had some additional stresses.
All right, thank you. Perhaps a last question from the online chat, and then a word by Marc, and we might close the discussion then. So a question from a crash colleague, Judith Soussan, who writes, echoing Jean-Hervé's question on what was most difficult, I wonder what helped you most in your research, and more specifically, I wonder to which extent your anthropological background may have helped you look for original hypotheses or find out things that someone else would have overlooked.
Thank you for an interesting question. So what helped me most probably was the motivation that behind all the information I was collecting, there was a way to improve things for the patients who are yet to come. So this was something that was driving me, that it's still driving me. And in terms of the anthropological backgrounds, I was trained, of course, to have an observational glance. So to remain a bit external to the topics that I was investigated. But to say so, like, of course, somebody else in my position might have completely different focus on the observation. So, of course, I also added my own interpretations and my own focus. And this also, I described like the process of reflection on that. I was describing in the book as well.
Thanks. Marc, you wanted to say something, perhaps?
Yeah, just one quick word about what we call multidisciplinary approach and what we try also to develop. And I think you mentioned it quickly, but it's something that is also a question that is often raised, is what we call the functional outcome of the surgery and of the treatment. And I agree, we often underestimate what we call the social functionality that you highlight also in your study. And when we consider only the functional, like eating, moving, grabbing, and so on, we try to. It's not typically in the criteria of Amman, what we call cosmetic surgeries related to plastic, but it's true that the social functionality of a face, of a smile, of an expression of emotion is something that is very important, and it's not always easy to tackle only with surgery, but it has to be managed from what we develop, like as multidisciplinary approach, like with mental health and proper physical and mental rehabilitation. And I think this social functionality is something that we should probably think a bit more in what we try to achieve in terms of outcomes within this program as well.
Merci, Marc. Thank you. You want to comment on that, or no? Okay. We'll close here. It's time. I thank you very much. Just a word, because I won't conclude in any way or wrap up any of those conversations. I will just invite you to keep in touch, because there will be further versions of that book. We're working on one French translation and a publication probably for the end of this year. There will also be an Arabic translation. And so we'll make sure that this book, its content, will be discussed in the months to come here, elsewhere, but also in the region, that the patients that have been also the subject of this research will have and receive some sort of feedback about that investigation. And we know, and we're also working on that all the conclusions, some of the observations that you've reached are, I mean, still the material for constant and consistent reflection on the part of MSF. So thank you very much for being with us, Vanja. Please keep in touch, all of you. I don't have the exact date of the future Crash conference, but I think we'll have one in April and one in May. So again, stay tuned via our social media channels. Thank you very much. Good evening, good night.